And as always, we would start the program with a short prayer. And to do this for us, may I kindly call Dr. Lawrence Bokwe to share a word of prayer with us.
Let us pray. Father, we are grateful unto you for another new day. We ask that you lead us through all our deliberations. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. On that note, I can call the meeting to order once we have prayed. So we had a lot of exciting moments yesterday. I'm sure we all remember the Pro-Vice Chancellor chairing our program for us and indeed opening the program for us as well. And in his speech, he actually indicated the several projects KNUST is conducting in the area of climate change. And he also indicated the fact that over 30 collaborative research projects are currently being sponsored by the Danish government. I think we should clap for them. And then he went on to also indicate the fact that for us as a university, we have 17 champions. And these champions are actively championing, if I can use the word again, the Sustainable Development Goals. And then Professor R.C. Robert Clement Abedu also indicated the purpose for the program. And like we all know, we know that this is a climate change, resilience, adaptation, and sustainable rural transformation international meeting or workshop. And our theme is consolidating climate change research and enhancing collaborative actions for a sustainable future. And in indicating the purpose for the conference, he indicated that we are expected to package it so very well and share our research findings to the scientific community as well as to policy makers in terms of the funding or the findings of BSU3 funded research works. And we also remember our keynote, the first keynote address, during which Professor Torsten Rodelberg took us through, gave us a historical perspective. And he also stressed on the fact that indeed, when it comes to climate change, or climate change doesn't know any boundaries. And in his address, the Royal Danish Ambassador to Ghana spelled out how Denmark is supporting Ghana, and importantly, how Denmark is leading when it comes to nationwide activities to limit climate change. Then we broke out into our parallel sessions on 3 thematic areas, i.e., climate change resilience, adaptation to global climate change, and sustainable rural transformation. And then the icing on the cake was Ghana's efforts at addressing change-related issues. I think the keynote speaker was very engaging. He mentioned some flagship programs, government-related flagship programs. He also shared with us a number of achievements as well as progress made in Ghana's quest to limit climate change. And then he also, as always, shared with us some important challenges. And then there was the exciting panel discussion, which focused on emerging issues in climate change research, the challenges and opportunities. And I remember key opportunities or key challenges first discussed. The key ones discussed were data acquisition, The fact that as scientists, most of us work in silos, and again, the fact that we sort of lack some engagement through communication-related skills when it comes to engaging communities and even policymakers as far as our research output is concerned. And so the need to prioritize and reprioritize our research agenda in the area of climate change. And importantly, trying to incorporate climate change related activities in our teaching as well as in our learning. So some or level or sort of revisions in our curricula. And we all realize that indeed, this is a golden opportunity for all of us to conduct research and as well engage policymakers when it comes to climate change related issues. So to set the stage for us this morning, we want to come home to KNUST and listen to some climate change research innovations. That's research that KNUST staff and students have conducted in the past and progressively or are also conducting, and also share some opportunities for future research collaborations. And to do that for us is the director of the Office of Grants and Research of KNUST. He's a former Commonwealth scholar. He obtained his PhD from the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom. And I consider him to be an interdisciplinary climate change scientist with a background in agric and environmental science. He's won a lot of grants. He's published widely. He serves as editor, reviewer, contributor. He has a tall profile. And he's a recipient of several grants from prestigious granting agencies. I'm not going to mention them. Just go online and check out on him. And he never wants to, or he never wants this mentioned, but he's also, he's telling me he's okay. He's also a reverend minister. And before his appointment as the director of OGR, he was handling the Young Researchers Forum. With a round of applause, he's already here. Shall we welcome Professor Philip Entry AJ?
Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? For those of us who are visiting Ghana for the first time, I hope you enjoyed your sleep last night. Any Nigerians here? Any Nigerian? Okay. This is the first, perhaps the first international conference that I have attended that I did not see any Nigerian. I'm hoping that next time we will have some Nigerians amongst us. Okay. Whilst they try to resolve the PowerPoint for me here, let me first of all take this opportunity to thank the organizing committee, the BSU coordinator, the BSU anchor, and the BLC team for asking me to provide a keynote presentation this morning. As already mentioned, my name is Philip Ntweje, and for the next 20-25 minutes, please, let me take you through some of the key overview of climate research by KNUST staff, and then perhaps go on to look at some kind of avenues available for future research collaborations. This will be my presentation outline. I will start by looking at how climate change poses threats to national development and look at some observed changes and impacts, and move on to look at some key research highlights across the key economic sectors of our economy, and then finally finish the presentation by looking at some of the avenues available for future research collaborations. To start with, I want to show this slide, which I took from a friend in Benin, who was the coordinating author for the Working Group 2, the African chapter on climate change in Africa. It shows that mean and extreme temperatures are increasing all over Africa. These trends can be attributed to human-induced climate change, what we call anthropogenic climate change. We are experiencing heat waves and drought all over the place. And this is not only peculiar to Africa. I was in Europe not long ago, and France and some other countries, even in Europe, are also experiencing drought. Climate change has doubled the probability of marine heat waves around most parts of Africa. And this is with very high confidence by the IPCC report. For those of us who are familiar with the IPCC report, they would normally ascribe some kind of level of confidence, and they were very high in terms of their confidence that marine heat wave is increasing. Again, multi-year drought has become more frequent in many parts of West Africa. And in Cape Town, it is said that drought was doubled 3 times, or it's more likely 3 times, due to human-induced climate change. But the point is, why are we so vulnerable as a continent, or sub-Saharan Africa? Why are we so vulnerable? The IPCC has always indicated or considered Africa to be the most vulnerable continent across the world. And this is due to a number of factors, but I will highlight 3 of them. We have very low adaptive capacity, very low infrastructural development, and also we have a lot of economies that are highly dependent on rain-fed agricultural systems, forestries, and the rest. But when you come home to Ghana as a country, it is projected that Ghana will suffer intense drought and increasing rainfall variability. And this will affect our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly goals relating to poverty reduction, Goal 1, goals relating to food security, Goal 2, improving gender equality, Goal number 5, and more importantly, attaining SDG 13. Not only that, it is also suggested that climate change has the potential to derail the mitigation and adaptation commitments that we have made under the nationally determined contribution. In terms of observed impacts, losses, and damages, Africa, as I said, we've contributed very little. It is estimated that we've contributed less than 5% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, as I said, we suffer most of the impacts and the losses and damages associated with climate change. Climate change-related extreme weather events have already impacted millions of Africans across the continent. Over the past 2 decades, between 2000 and then 2019, we have experienced over 37 million people, or 37 million people who've been affected by climate change-related natural disasters. And out of this, floods account 80%, and the remaining 16% are due to drought. 80 for floods and 16 for drought, and then the remaining maybe 4 are due to other non-climate factors. Then over 46,000 deaths have been reported in Africa between this period, with 32% due to floods and 46% due to drought. And this is quite significant. And these figures are from the IPCC's assessment report, which was recently released. And again, there has been displacement by weather-related disasters across sub-Saharan Africa. In 2018 alone, nearly 2.6 million were displaced. And in 2019, around 3.4 million people were displaced. So I'm not too sure what will happen if the trend should continue into 2030. Again, climate change affects all the economic or sensitive economic sectors in Africa. If you take temperature, if you take agriculture, we have changes in precipitation and temperature trends, and these have implications for crop yield. As I said, many of our economies are highly dependent on rainfall agricultural systems. It means that anytime there are variations in our rainfall patterns, our farmers are not able to cope in most of the instances. When it comes to water as a sector, we have variable precipitation, increasing water stress. The difficulty is that you don't even know when the rains will come. And when the rain finally comes, you have a lot of it coming within a short period of time, therefore causing floods and all kinds of things. Coastal areas, we are having rising sea levels and then increasing danger of flooding and coastal erosion. We have salinization of our coastal areas such that this kind of land are no longer able to support crop production. When you talk of health as a sector, we have changes in malnutrition, changes to climate change will increase the risk of malnutrition, poor sanitation, disease, and natural disasters. I mean, whenever there's flood, the danger is not even with the loss of infrastructure as a result of the flood, but the danger is with the sanitation issues, the breakdown of sewage systems and the rest. And then energy, I mean, for those of us in Ghana, we've witnessed in the past whenever there's shortage of water in the dam, Makosombo Dam particularly, we have challenges with hydro power supply. Then cities and infrastructure as a sector, you have floods and heat impacting on our buildings, impacting on our roads network and the rest. So how do we address these kind of challenges? How do we address this kind of impasse associated with climate change? The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change suggests two key approaches: mitigation and adaptation. And I think since yesterday we've been used to this kind of words, but I will try and explain here. When you talk of mitigation, it involves any activity that will help you to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted into the atmosphere, such that you reduce the rates of, or you slow the rates of global warming. Agroforestry systems and all kinds of things are mitigation practices. That is why we encourage people to plant trees so as to absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But having said that, assuming we are all deciding today that we are no longer going to emit greenhouse gases into the system for the next few years, what will happen? It doesn't mean that climate change or global warming will stop, because we have already introduced a lot of greenhouse gases into the system. And many of these greenhouse gases, including methane, carbon dioxide, has very long residual long life, such that some of them can stay in the system for 50 to 100 years. It means that even if we should change our lifestyle, which is not possible anyways, we should dramatically change our lifestyle, not to introduce any longer greenhouse gases, we will still need to be able to adapt. So adaptation talks of all the processes by which stakeholders, including you and myself, used to reduce the adverse impacts of climate change on our livelihoods based on the IPCC definition. We need to change our lifestyle, change our economic system to address this kind of changes or this kind of damages or impasse. So the purpose of my presentation this morning is to highlight some of the key research that we have done here as a university in addressing the threats posed by climate change on the socio-economic development of Ghana. And then, as I said earlier, based on that, identify some key areas for future collaboration research. Let me start by highlighting the Paris Climate Agreement, which came into force in 2016. Ghana, as a country, I think we've signed, we are very good at signing all the conventions. If you go to UNFCCC's Secretariat website, you realize that we've signed almost all the international conventions related to the environment and other areas. What the Paris Agreement sought to do was that it represents a universal treaty on climate change that will support equitable environmental kind of system in a low carbon resilient development or future. 2015 represented an interesting year for those of us that follow the debates on climate change and other environmental issues. Because 2015 was when the SDGs replaced the MDGs, and the same year when the leaders of the world met, and during COP21, COP represents Conference of Parties. When they met at COP21 in Paris, then they agreed to the Paris Climate Agreement. It adopts a bottom-up approach. Before the PCA or the Paris Climate Agreement, what was happening was that there was what we call a top-down approach, where countries were given mandate. Maybe Ghana, you are asked to reduce your emissions by a certain percentage by a certain year. United States was asked to do that, but they realized that those targets were not working, and therefore we needed a more bottom-up approach where countries presented what they were prepared to do to support addressing climate threats based on their unique socio-economic characteristics, based on their ability to do that. So as a country in Ghana and many of countries across sub-Saharan Africa, we submitted our mitigation and adaptation intentions in what we call nationally determined contributions, NDCs. I'm sure Dr. Tutu yesterday mentioned some of these things. In Ghana, when you are mentioning NDCs and NPP, you need to be careful so that you don't sound too political. So when I make reference to NDC, I'm not referring to a political party, but I'm referring to the nationally determined contribution for this morning. Thank you very much. These were the key sectors that were actually highlighted in our NDCs that was submitted in 2015. And I must admit and say that in 2020, just last 2 years and last year, the country updated our NDCs and then resubmitted this to the Secretariat. So my presentation will be based on, in terms of our contribution, it will be based on how KNUST researchers have contributed to achieving the NDCs by sectors in terms of our research, how we've done that. As a university, I'm sure yesterday our Pro-VC mentioned it. For those of you who were not here, let me mention that we are the best in Ghana. And when it comes to quality education, according to the Times Global Impact Ranking, we are the best in Africa and 12 the whole wide world. I thought you were going to clap for us, please. So, I'll take us through these key sectors and see what we've done as a university. So when it comes to climate change and agriculture, we have a lot of our colleagues who are working on understanding the vulnerability of agricultural systems to climate change. If you go to the Faculty of Agriculture, Department of Crop Science, if you come to Department of Environmental Science, we have colleagues who are working to understand how our agricultural systems are vulnerable and the key adaptation practices and barriers employed by smallholder farmers to address the impacts or the threats of climate change. We also have colleagues in departments of crop science who are engaged in breeding drought-resistant varieties of crop. One of the key adaptation measures that the government over the years has advocated for is the use of drought-tolerant varieties of crops, and we are doing a lot of research to advance that kind of agenda. We also have some of our colleagues in soil and crop research doing soil carbon or soil organic carbon sequestration studies. I mean, you cannot talk of agricultural productivity without the nature of the soil or the ability of the soil to retain carbon or to sequestrate carbon for that matter. Then we have some colleagues who are in Department of Agricultural Engineering and Biosystems Engineering, doing work in innovative post-harvest losses and food waste reduction. The problem we have in the world is that it's not the lack of production of food. The problem we have is storage and then distribution. So any attempt to address food losses or food waste will help us to address the challenges that climate change will have on agriculture. Then, in environmental science, in Faculty of Agriculture, including myself, we have colleagues who are looking at what kind of climate-smart agricultural practices that can be used to build the resilience of smallholder farmers, especially within the northern Ghana where climate change manifests greatly. When you talk of climate-smart agricultural practices, we are looking at any agricultural practice that does three things. One, that reduces greenhouse gas emission. Two, that build the capacity of the farmers to address climate change. And thirdly, that increases food production. So what kind of practices farmers are using to do that? We have colleagues who are doing that. And then also we have colleagues looking at climate change and livestock production. If you go to animal science department, we have our friends, our colleagues who are working on the impacts of climate change on livestock production, and then how do we also manage feedstock so as to reduce the methane produced from ruminant production. The FAO defines food security as a situation that exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meet their dietary needs and food preferences for active and healthy life. But I'm sorry to say that climate change affects all aspects of food security. So in Ghana, we have a saying in our local that pintimbia edai, as long as your belly is full, you are okay to go. But or your stomach is full, you are okay to go. Or you are satisfied when it comes to food security. But that is not the issue. If you eat gobe in the morning, gobe in the evening, gobe in the evening, you are not meeting your dietary what? Needs. Gobe, for those of you who are not Ghanaians, gobe is gari and what? Beans. So our colleagues are doing research that cuts across all the three components of food security. When it comes to food utilization, we have people who are looking at nutritional value of food in food science and biotechnology. We have those that are looking at social value, food safety issues. When it comes to food access, food affordability, and allocation preferences, we have colleagues in the Department of Economics who are doing research to address some of these research gaps or research needs. Then, of course, one of the important aspects of food security is availability. How much food we are able to produce within a given area. We need to be aware that climate change will affect food production by a number of factors, including even reducing the area of land suitable for the production of food. And the distribution-wise, for those of us in Ghana and many parts of West Africa, food is mainly produced in the hinterlands, in the villages. And to be able to transport food into the urban areas, we need good transportation network and transportation systems. But sometimes you have intense, extreme weather events, including floods and storms, disrupting our road network. So climate change will affect the amount of food that we are even able to produce and those that we are able to distribute in terms of its transportation into the urban areas. And you have colleagues who are doing research across all these kinds of components of food security. And there's a fourth component, depending on the book that you read, in terms of food stability, how stable your food supply is. And I've always used tomato production in the country as an example whenever I'm teaching some of this, or I'm presenting some of this. There was a time I was going to Bolga on the Kintampo. I got to Kintampo, and a rubber of tomato was being sold for, I think, 30 cedis or so, Ghana cedis. Then within 3 months or 4 months, we went back, and the same rubber was being sold for over 200 Ghana cedis. Our production is not stable, and it's all because of lack of distribution, storage, and other factors. When it comes to climate change and land use or forestry, the department or the faculty of natural resources is leading this. And a number of our colleagues are looking into agroforestry systems, agroforestry practices. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I said that agroforestry is a mitigation practice when it comes to addressing climate change. Then those who are living at the fringe of forest communities, how are their livelihoods being impacted by climate change, and what kind of things are they doing to address this kind of impact? Then we have colleagues in terms of land use, in environmental science, in engineering, and other areas, including med science, looking at how climate change and land use changes impact on the hydrological processes. Then ecosystem-based adaptation practices. What kind of ecosystem-based adaptation practices are being employed by forest fringe communities and smallholder farmers? We have colleagues in natural resource faculty looking into this. And then, of course, land use typologies and land tenure regimes. Let me highlight this study that we did in 2019. As part, this was sponsored by BSU. That is why I've singled out to show this. Felix, who sits here, and other colleagues, Professor Gam, Professor Bedu was also part of this study. What we found out was that in 2014, the Owabe catchment had a lot of green, high dense forest. By 2090, we were losing a lot of high dense forest to urbanization and other areas. If you fast forward to 2010 and 2014, most of the green, high dense, and sparse forests have been taken up by built environment. And for those of us who are conversant with the Owabe catchment, the Owabe produces the water supply, together with Barikese, produces the water supply we need in the Kumasi metropolis and other areas. And the water itself keeps reducing in size because we've built around it. I use that place whenever there's traffic on the Biakwa Road, and whenever I get there, I'm not able to witness what I see. A lot of people are building in those areas. So our worry is, if this trend should continue, nobody knows what will happen by 2050, by 2080. Nobody knows what will happen. So these are some of the things that we are doing to address some of the challenges posed by climate change as a country. When it comes to water resources and fisheries, as early as 2009, Dr. Benjamin Jampo did his PhD on fisheries in 2009. So we've been doing some of these things for a while. And if you go to the Department of Fisheries, Aquaculture, and the rest, I think they are doing quite a lot in terms of understanding how fisheries or fishes will be impacted by climate change, how our water resources would be impacted. We have one of the World Bank Centers of Excellence at the school, risk, and they do a lot of work together with the Civil Engineering Department on understanding the ecological vulnerability of our rivers or river basins, including Densu, Lake Volta, and the rest. We have colleagues who are also looking at water scarcity under a changing climate in Ghana. What are the options for livelihood adaptations? What do we have, or what can we do to address some of the impacts that climate change have on our water resources? A lot of our colleagues are doing modeling in math science, environmental science, and other departments that I may not be able to mention because of time, are doing a lot of work to understand or to enhance our understanding of how climate change affects our water resources and fisheries. When it comes to energy and transportation, we have colleagues at the Energy Center. Our Energy Center and TCC Technology Center are doing so well in these areas, particularly the Energy Center. They are developing bioenergy conversion alternatives for climate change mitigation. They are also engaged in hybrid waste to energy studies that will help us to be able to address some of the challenges associated with climate change in terms of energy production and utilization. And I saw a paper that was written by somebody in natural resources, how to minimize wood residue utilization and reducing its production rate in an effort to combat climate change. So, I mean, this was quite innovative work that was done by a colleague in the department together with other friends across the university. We are also promoting solar pumping irrigation for all year-round crop production. As I mentioned earlier, about our farmers depend highly on natural rains. Indeed, it is estimated that 95% of all agricultural lands in Ghana are under some kind of rain-fed agricultural systems. Only 5% or so is under irrigation. And this is a reflection of the wider sub-Saharan Africa region. It means that if we can get some kind of water or some kind of irrigation, small-scale irrigation for our farmers to produce crops, especially vegetable, during all year round, then we will be in a position in building their resilience, in building their capacity to address the threats posed by climate change on their livelihoods. And for that, I am happy to announce or to say that, and I think it needs to be encouraged. Then public health as an issue. We feel that climate change is a public health issue. And we have colleagues within the public health, School of Public Health, who are doing a lot of work looking at the implications of climate change for our public health systems or our public health. And they continue to enhance our understanding into how climate change will affect all of us and affect our health in that regard. When it comes to disaster risk reduction, I'm so sad to say that anytime, yesterday I was happy that Dr. Beneful mentioned that there's a $200 million project to address floods in Accra. This year, I witnessed places in Accra where in the past we haven't witnessed flooding. And it's quite scary. And even in Kumasi and other parts of the country where we were not witnessing floods, we are witnessing what? Floods across all these places. So when it comes to disaster risk reduction, we have colleagues in environmental science and climate and Med Science through the African Swift project, who are building the capacity of our meteorological agencies so as to be able to provide forecasts ahead of time so that we can plan our journey, we can plan our lives. But I'm so sad to say that as Ghanaians, many of us don't trust climate information or weather forecasts. When forecasts are given, sometimes we are a bit reluctant to adhere to this forecast. And I pray that we change our attitude and embrace the kind of forecasts that are turned out by the Met services. Once we do that, it encourages them. I think they are doing very well now. I teach some of their classes, and I used to teach them that in 2016, during our 6th March, it was raining, and the president was giving his address, and somebody had to hold an umbrella. So I keep teasing them, and they said we gave advice, just that the people who were meant to act on it did not what? Act on it. And it's a reflection of a societal disregard for weather forecasts. But I'm happy to say that as a university, we've taken this challenge seriously and doing a lot of research in that regard to enhance our understanding of weather forecasts in mitigating or addressing climate change. I mean, we work closely with the GMET, as I've already mentioned. Then, when you go to geography, we have colleagues in geography who are looking at the implications of the depletion of green spaces. When I was growing up, it's my time. Okay, I'll finish soon, don't worry. When I was growing up, I realized that we had a lot of green, and whenever I was in town, my daddy would take me to playground, somewhere in Ashtown. Now it's no longer there. There's no green. Kumasi used to be called what? The Garden City. We've lost that kind of pride. And others are looking at flood, disaster risk reduction intervention, and urban planning and mobility studies from planning. We have colleagues who are enhancing our understanding on the basic science of it, measurement of greenhouse gases through the Met and Climate Science Department. Then gender and the vulnerable. We are doing gender-based vulnerability assessment, gender and indigenous food systems, gender and climate information systems, and adaptation system. I have 2 slides, and I will use 1 minute each so that you have 3 minutes. I will end before you come back. So what are the avenues for future collaborations? I'm sure whatever it is that you are doing, energy, water, transport, health, gender, you will find some kind of collaboration to do with our colleagues from KNUST. We need to enhance our understanding of climate change, data generation, and usage. You cannot address what you cannot measure. If you cannot measure it, you cannot address it. So we need to be able to measure what is happening, and to be able to do that, we need effective system, innovative system, or infrastructure to generate climate data and use it efficiently. Then the climate information services, I've already mentioned the way we are working with GMET. We need to build collaborations to address infrastructural deficits and systems to enhance dissemination of climate information services. The other thing we need to, that will serve as future research collaboration is climate change as a driver of conflict and migration. Climate change as a driver of conflict and migration. There's still a lot of contestation in terms of whether climate change drives migration or conflict or not, and we need people to look into that. Then, livestock production. A lot of our studies, if you look at the literature, a lot of the studies that we've done as a university is on food systems, food security, energy, water. When it comes to livestock, even though our colleagues in the Faculty of Agriculture are doing well, but we are encouraging collaborative work in looking at how livestock production will be affected by climate change. The last slide, climate change and crop and disease outbreak dynamics. We don't know the exact mechanisms involved, and we want to encourage all of us to look into this, developing proposals to address this. Then when it comes to energy, development of climate smart systems for energy management, and then using AI, artificial intelligence, to study climate patterns for renewable energy development. If I were to go back to do BSc or PhD again, I would do nothing but to do something on AI and this application on climate systems. Now, for our young and emerging scientists, I encourage all of you to look at how we can use AI, big data to address climate change and its associated impacts. Of course, I need to also mention that when it comes to health, we are still grappling with the issues involved. Let's do that, and finally, we can develop climate smart renewable energy systems installation, and by doing that, we'll be able to reduce or minimize land use changes that may come as a result of some of these things. Climate change presents us with a lot of challenges, but it also presents or comes with some level of opportunities for us to collaborate. So let's do that, and because we cannot solve the complex climate change. Some people want to call it a wicked environmental problem. We cannot solve that if we work in silos as we've been used to. Let's try and do collaborations in all our kinds of our research, energy, water, transport, and gender. And once we do that, I am very sure the good Lord will bless our efforts with success. On that, God richly bless us all.
Another round of applause for our speaker. Thank you very much. So he took us through 8 thematic areas. So areas where researchers on campus KNUST are conducting various impactful activities. And importantly, he also gave us 8, I call them low-hanging fruits, in terms of the opportunities available to all of us. Can I allow 3 comments? 3 comments. You can just make a comment or a short question, burning questions. Anyone with a comment or a question, clarification, please go ahead.
Yeah, Kirill Manevsky from Aarhus University researcher. Just a brief question, maybe with a briefer answer. How does fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goal 1 fits in these 8 avenues for future research? Because it hasn't been achieved in much of Africa. Thanks.
Next comment or question, and then Prof will attempt to answer all of them. Comments? All right, Prof.
Yeah, Kiri, thank you very much for me, with that addressing SDG 1, all the other SDGs will be difficult to address. Because if you are poor, and I'm using that word advisedly, you don't mind what is happening to the environment. You need food to eat. Whatever you do to get food, you do what? To get food. Is that okay? If you are looking for food to eat, you don't think too much about gender equality. Is that okay? If you are looking for food to eat and you are poor, you don't look at whether the water you are drinking or whatever. I know people who are drinking water that they may not want to drink under normal what, but they are forced to what? To drink. So addressing SDG 1, which is the poverty reduction, for me underpins most of the other SDGs. Unfortunately, we did not do so well when it came to the number of poor people in the country through the MDGs. Is that okay? By 2015, many countries did not attain that, especially those of us in sub-Saharan Africa. And certainly Ghana will not attain that. We have got 7-8 years to go until 2030. And SDG 1 is one area that we need to be able to do better. But as a university, I'm also happy, and I think it was mentioned by my provost yesterday, and even Augustina mentioned it this morning. We have what we call SDG champions. People, we have appointed researchers, professors who are championing the attainment of each of the 17 SDGs. And the SDG 1 is, I think, championed by the director for student affairs, Professor Ejari. So as a university, we are mindful of the fact that if we cannot achieve SDG 1, where we are lagging behind as a country, we'll be struggling when it comes to 2030 to make any meaningful impact on all the other SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have another comment. Please make it snappy.
I think those of us on this, listen, the mics are not working. If they can work on it for us, please.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think it's mostly like a common knowledge that in Ghana we have theories are different from practice. So per the insightful presentation that you've given, I just want to know KNUST efforts in championing some of these insightful research to inform government policies, because obviously most government policies are not informed by research. So how is KNUST efforts helping to implement some of these policies in government?
Okay. Thank you very much, my friend. I think you are definitely right. Sometimes most of the things that we do not inform policy, and I admit that. But as a university, I am also aware that we do influence some of the things that they do. Our doors are always open. We recently had exhibition as part of our 70th anniversary, and we tried to seek how to engage or partner with industry to have impactful and meaningful research. All that we are doing is to be able to inform policy. Is that okay? But unfortunately, our policymakers sometimes, I need to be careful here, this is off record, please, are driven by votes. Is that okay? If they look at what will bring them what? Votes. And not necessarily how to address what? Some of these challenges. Please don't go and quote me that I said politicians are interested in vote, please. So it's a challenge for all of us. But I believe that one of the things that have helped the West is that most of the policies are informed by science. Is that okay? And we also need to be aware that most of these researches are funded by external what? Donors. Are you following me? And external donors have, I mean, you've indicated in your proposal what you want to do. Is that okay? External donors have their own what? Agenda, their own areas that they want to what? Advance. So I think as a nation, we need to support science. We need to devote much of our resources to development and understanding of science. He who pays the piper, what? So if you are not paying us, I'm not saying that they should pay us before we make our research fundings what? Available to them. Our research fundings are available and they should come for it. We are I think the university is even in the process of appointing somebody who will liaise with academia, industry, and policy makers. I think plans are far advanced to do that. So let's see, and many of us tend to become politicians. Is that okay? I wouldn't be surprised in 5 years, 10 years' time, I will see you contesting for the Dio constituency if you are from there. If you become a politician, come back and talk to us. Is that okay? Sometimes we have our own colleagues who leave us, become politicians, and they behave as if they were never part of us. They don't want to take what the science is saying. Thank you very much.
A lot to think about, and I'm sure during our snack break time, we will really have a lot to deliberate on. I won't even ask for more comments. Otherwise, it will bring out a lot of issues. We want to listen to our next keynote speaker in the person of Professor Peter Furu. He will speak to us on the topic Planetary Health. I think health is very important. Not that I think. Health is indeed very important. There's a saying that your health is your wealth, right? So he will talk to us on planetary health, the impact of climate change on community livelihoods and health. And Professor Peter Furu is a public health scientist based at the Global Health section of the Department of Public Health, University of Copenhagen. He's an associate professor in global environmental health, and he also doubles as the director of studies of the Master of Disaster Management program at the university. He's a former head of the World Health Organization's Collaborating Center on Health and Environment in Sustainable Development. Indeed, he's the right person to talk to us on this particular topic. He has more than 39 years of working experience in global health and development, mainly from countries in Africa and as well in Southeastern Asia. His main research area happens to be in planetary health, sustainable tourism, environmental health, health impact assessment, climate change, adaptation, and gender, health impacts of climate change, and integrated schistosomiasis control. Shall we welcome Professor Peter Furu to speak to us?
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for this warm welcome, and good morning to all of you. It's very nice to be back here in this very nice setting. I remember I have been teaching here for a number of times in previous BSU courses in the phase 2 and phase 3. So it's great to be back and great to see some well-known faces as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak today. And also thank you so much to Professor Philip, the previous speaker, for giving an excellent overview of some of the parts actually of the topics that I will also cover. So my presentation will really re-emphasize some of the learnings we just had in the previous talk. So let me, how do I shift this one? Okay. So my point of departure would be change. You know, first time I came here in 1994, a lot of changes has happened in Ghana and worldwide, globally. So I would like to highlight some of the more global changes that we have seen and also narrow down, focus down to the Ghanaian situation and give some few examples of what we have seen in terms of changes. I will also speak a little bit about collaboration. We have also heard in the previous talk on the importance of the relevance of working together on collaborating in order to achieve the best results. So in more details, I will talk a bit about climate change and variability on a global scale and in Ghana. I will highlight one of the other important drivers of change, namely population dynamics in the form of demographic change. I will speak a little bit about the planetary systems and boundaries that we see and which are under tremendous pressure. And then finally also on climate change and health, giving you some examples and talk a little bit about what are the issues for Ghana and where does climate change come in. In terms of the collaboration, I will highlight the importance of sectoral responsibilities and collaboration and also speak a little bit about research collaboration. We have heard a lot in the previous talk, so I'll not dwell too much on this, but just re-emphasize on the need of joining forces in research. So, changes are happening in so many directions. Let me focus on first the climate change and variability. When I add variability, it is because we see natural fluctuations in the climate that may not be due to anthropogenic activities. So I will highlight sort of some of the more general changes and variabilities over time. So this is actually the observed temperature changes for Ghana from 1901 to 2020. So we'll see overall, or generally, that temperatures have risen approximately 1 degree since the 1960s. And the number of very hot days have increased by over 30% per year. In addition, hot nights with temperatures higher than 26 degrees are increasing by 20% per year. So quite dramatic heating of the country. This is not a phenomenon just for Ghana. This is happening globally, as you know, and as we heard from the previous talk. Well, these were some retrospective figures. If you look ahead, the projected changes, what do we see? Well, we see some quite dramatic scenarios depending on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions we experience. So the worst case scenario is the red line, where we can see quite high temperature changes, as opposed to the blue line, which is more or less the status quo. I mean, it's the level if we actually do manage to tackle climate change appropriately. So the blue line is what we should aim for, and this is also in accordance with the Paris Declaration that we just heard about. In terms of the precipitation, it's quite striking that over time, and into the future, we see very little increase in the average precipitation. However, we will see an increased frequency of extreme weather events. So we will have more extremes in terms of flooding, more drought episodes, but on the average, we do not see much increase over the next 80 years or so. In terms of extreme weather, well, we have heard some of the figures behind the natural hazards that we see in Ghana, but what we see that floods often cut off communities, and here an example from the northeast region of Ghana. People are really feeling the strain of the excess rain that has fallen in recent years during these extreme weather events. Similarly, we see that livelihoods in northern Ghana are under threat due to drought. This is also the case in other parts of Ghana, but I think the upper western region is the most sensitive to drought at the moment due to the high temperatures in that area. We should not only think of what is happening at the rural settings. It's indeed also an urban phenomenon. So we see here an example from Kumasi where demolished structures are hindering water runoff. We see it in another example here where buildings are hindering the flow of water away from waterways and destroying property and also having other implications. Now, in terms of disasters, one thing is to speak about hazards. They do not necessarily develop into disasters. That depends on the vulnerability and the overall sort of coping mechanisms that are in place. But for disasters in Ghana, from 1900 to 2020, we see different types with flooding and extreme heat, drought being the dominating factors. The figures here for epidemics is not up to date because they do not include the COVID-19 fatalities. So be cautious there interpreting this particular table.
It's not.
Is this one better? Yeah, okay. So a number of disasters are happening due to natural hazards like flooding, drought, extreme wind, and so forth. With the disaster, they develop depending on the vulnerability of populations. Okay, yes, I will try, yes, thank you. Well, depending on the exposure that you experience and the sensitivity of systems to climate change, we see a potential impact that depending on the adaptive capacity. One example here from Ghana is looking at the climate change vulnerability. And a survey has been done, an assessment has been done in the 216 districts of Ghana. And you will notice here that it is indeed the upper west region that is mostly affected. They have the highest score of CCV, the Climate Change Vulnerability Index. Further down near the coast, we have cooler areas, so they are less vulnerable to climate change. Now, another driving force would be the population dynamics. And what is the changes we see at global level? Well, it is in fact quite scary, I think, to see how steep a rise we see over the next 100 years. Today, the global population is approximately 8 million. We will arrive at that figure next year, but in about 30 years' time, we will reach 10 billion. A tremendous high number, which of course will increase the demand for additional food production to actually sustain that population. So how is the population in Ghana then forecasted to change? Well, today the population is approximately 32 million people, but in 2100 you will reach almost 52 million. So many new mouths to feed. And that's why it is so important that, that we find solutions to a more sustainable delivery of food supply to the human populations in Ghana and globally. Let me speak a little bit about changes of planetary systems. And in fact, the Earth has crossed several planetary boundaries, and thresholds of human-induced environmental changes have been passed. This is an example of the 9 processes and components that have been sort of identified by a group of researchers with the Stockholm Environment Institute. And we see climate change being one of the factors among the 9, and this is the focus of my presentation today. Other important boundaries would be the freshwater use, the land system change that we observe, where you see that here they have already been more or less exceeded. Except for freshwater use, there's still some room here. The dotted line indicates the safe operating space. If you exceed that limit, we reach a level where the environmental degradation will be so big that it is difficult to recover the situation. Now, in terms of the measures of consumption over time, this is one of the main drivers of change. And for water use, you can see since the 1950s, there's been a tremendous steep increase in the water consumption. The same goes for transportation, for paper production, for plastic production. The primary energy use that we observe all over has increased tremendously. In the agricultural sector, the fertilizer consumption has increased dramatically as well over the last 70 years. This, of course, will have an impact on our natural systems. So you see in terms of the biosphere degradation, there's a tremendous increase in the extinction of species. We have overexploited our fish populations. You see there's a drop in the fish capture in the marine areas. It's going down now simply because many fish populations have been exhausted. For carbon dioxide, of course, we see the same pattern. It goes up and up and up, and that results in ocean acidification, tropical forest loss, and you can continue like that. That brings us to the concept of planetary health, because planetary health is looking at the health of our civilization and the state of the natural systems on which it depends. And as I've just explained and shown, many of these natural systems are simply degrading and disappearing and being destructed. That will influence human health. So it is the consumption patterns, the demographic shifts we see, the technology development, and the materialism we see increasing so much globally and nationally around the world. This will impact the various ecological drivers, which again may lead to certain effects, not only on the proximate causes of, for example, the health effects, but also on the various environmental conditions. I will focus now on climate change and the health impacts. So I'm taking just one of these ecological drivers, namely climate change, and will explain a bit more about this particular thing. And why is climate change and health so important? I think this was emphasized back in 2009, where it was highlighted that climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. This statement, an extremely strong statement, was based on the evidence that existed at the time in 2009, and the so-called Lancet Commission simply concluded that climate change would be the most important health threat in our century. So that's why it's important to include health as a component when we speak about all the factors that are relevant for the livelihoods, for the well-being of communities and individuals. So the health effects, based on these different hazards that we see, are depending on the various ecological drivers. And what will develop is a number of different health concerns, health issues, conditions that will kill, conditions that will make people chronically ill or mentally ill, depending on the type of, determinants that are in place. This is quite scary that there are so many sort of health conditions that are influenced by climate change. It's a fact, and we need to react on this. So, again, Ghana as an example. What causes the most death in Ghana? Anybody knows? Who? Malaria? Good choice. Malaria is actually top number one in the list of causes of death in Ghana. So it's the 10 causes of total number of deaths from 2009 and the changes we've seen up to 2019. It is quite noticeable that we have here what we call a double burden of disease, because we have both communicable diseases, the red ones, and we have non-communicable diseases, the blue ones. So the blue ones are the chronic diseases. And you will also notice that in the last 10 years, the top 10 has not changed in terms of what are the health issues, but their position has changed. And we noticed that the non-communicable diseases have increased a lot. So stroke, heart conditions, diabetes are increasing. At the same time, we see that malaria, for example, although it is still number one and was also in 29, it has been reduced by more than 30% in the last 10 years. A tremendous achievement, mainly due to the use of impregnated bed nets. There is a strong link between malaria and climate change, and we may foresee that in the future, with the excess rains that we see sometimes leaving pools of water for mosquito breeding, that malaria may increase again. Continued effort by health authorities is needed, of course, to keep it down and even decrease its position as number one today to a much lower position. Right. My next question is, who has the responsibility? Well, some would say, well, the health sector has the responsibility because they are able to cure and to prevent and so forth. However, I think human health in a climate change context is not the responsibility of the health sector alone. You will see that most ill health originate from activities in other sectors. So when you do transport policies, then that may immediately have some influence on people's health, because if you emphasize individual driving of cars rather than public transport or even cycling or walking, then you may have serious health implications. Similarly, if you in the education sector focus on good health education, good environmental education, then you can actually have an influence on the health status. So today we have a rather sort of divided approach. Each sector have their own responsibilities, but I think for health, we need to come together. We need intersectoral collaboration for health, for planetary health. Here we have health at the center, so they could be coordinating the interventions together with efforts by other sectors. How about research? Where does it come in? We have heard in the previous speak that there have been tremendous developments within climate change research here at KNUST, but how does it fit with the work by individual sectors? Well, I think, of course, it should be attached somehow to activities in those sectors. I think it's important to emphasize that our research should not be supply-driven. We should not make the agenda for what is to be researched. The demand should come from the individual sectors, and we should work together in a collaboration and using an interdisciplinary approach. We have heard about the SDGs many times, and here health is at the center, and it does in fact link to all the other goals, the other 16 goals, very nicely, and you will not see any improvements in health if you do not interact with all the other sustainable development goals. Number 2, for example, on ensuring proper nutrition and food is important. Number 13 is on climate change. Number 6 is on water supply and sanitation. So all of them are relevant. Just to highlight that when we develop research, we should look into where are the relevance for the different SDGs. Let me end on a positive note. What could be the health opportunities? Well, nicely, in 2015, on the front page of the Lancet, you know, the most prestigious medical journal, it said, tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. I think this is only possible if we work together, if we break down the walls between sectors, and if we are much better to work across disciplines. From my experience over the past almost 40 years in this field, I have discovered that these walls between sectors can be very, very thick, and it's hard to break them down. But we need to continue emphasizing the need to break down these walls and do a collective effort working together. Right, so this is my last word. I thank you for your attention, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for taking us through 2 key areas, change and collaboration, some sectorial responsibilities, some research collaboration responsibilities, and importantly, the fact that when it comes to setting the research agenda, it should really come from the individual sectors. Is it all right to allow 3 comments or questions, short ones? Yes.
Finn Blauborg from Aarhus University. Thank you very much, Peter, for this very wide overview and focus on Ghana. If we think about the former speaker and now add yours, do anyone know globally where the uptake of our research is strong, where the politic people really take our notes and put it into policy and implement it? Because here in Ghana it seems that some politic people, they think about their own votes. So have you any statistic on that? Could be very interesting.
Well, I don't know about the statistics, but I know that it's not enough to do research communication. You also need to ensure the uptake of the research. And in order to take up research at policy and decision-maker level, you need to use appropriate technologies. So you have to develop your policy briefs in a layman's language to be understood by politicians. They cannot read our scientific papers. I don't know the statistics in Ghana on how well this is done, but there's a need. Every time you publish, you should also develop a policy paper that supports your publication and can be understood and taken up by other levels.
Thank you. Any other comment? Yes. Yes, please shout.
Well, I don't know if I have the answer, but what is important is to develop the right consortium behind an application. And I think many foundations, many funders actually require that you link up with partners and do a joint application. So you're more or less forced to do this. It is rarely, I think it's very rare to see a situation where a single person or single institution can seek funding. Well, it may happen, but I think it's an advantage if you can join forces.
Thank you very much for the question. I think as a society, we are too individualistic. We tend to have all kinds of reasons why we should not collaborate with people. Let me give a typical example. When I was doing my PhD in Leeds, whenever somebody was promoted within the department, as soon as they sat on it, that very moment, everybody in the department will hear. Here, I think just until recently, if somebody was promoted, you will never hear until maybe later. Sometimes we think we are too superstitious. We want to compete rather than what? Collaborating. And it's so sad. We've started doing a lot of things with UCC. Professor Amma who used to be, he just left, and now is Professor Duku, who has taken over. There was even a proposal we are working on for the 2 universities. We are looking for a grant from some IDRC, and we are tackling the same problem. I feel that we need to work together. Tomorrow and Friday, BSU is bringing all the research administrators across, I think KNUST, Legon, Cape Coast, and some other universities in West Africa together, and see how we can move along the same path and sing from the same song sheet. We cannot address some of these wicked challenges if we want to work in silos, if we want to compete with each other. The only way we can address them is to put aside our parochial interests and collaborate with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. A round of applause. However, for me, I don't think that the situation is that bleak. There seem to be some ongoing intra-collaborative activities, but the catchword is that we need to enhance and improve on such collaborations. On that note, I think we've sat down for a long time, and so we deserve a snack. However, we have only 10 minutes to take our snacks. So we expect all of us to be back at 10:35 for our breakout sessions. Enjoy your snack break.
He is God, Ruach Elohim, and we welcome him here.